Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Shlosha ve'esrim. The Laws of Shabbos, chapter 23. We're continuing the discussion of the rabbinic decrees that are related to each of the 39 avot malachot, primary categories of labor on the Shabbos. Today we're going to cover another 4 of the malachot. We begin with makeh b'patish, the malacha of putting a finishing touch on an object, and the rabbinic decrees related to that. Then some of the decrees related to tanning leather and smoothing it down. And then some of the rabbinic decrees related to writing, to the malacha of ktiva. So here we go. Halacha Aleph, ha'oseh nekev shehu asui lahachnis ulehotzi. Somebody who makes a hole which is meant to be both drawing something in and taking something out. For example, it could go nekev shebelul tarnegolin, a hole in a chicken coop. Shehu asui lahachnis ha'ora ulehotzi ha'hevel. It's meant to bring light in, and it's meant to send the smell or the hot air out. You would be biblically liable for the malacha of haka'ah bepatish, putting the finishing touch on an object. Lefichach, therefore, the rabbi said, gazru al kol nekev. They decreed about every single hole. Afilu haya asui lehotzi bilvad o lahachnis bilvad. Even if it's made just to get something out or just to bring something in, it doesn't have a dual purpose, only a single one. You can't make it. Shema yavo la'asot nekev shechayavin alav. Perhaps you might come that might lead you to make a hole which you'll be held liable for. That's why if you have a barrel, you cannot make a new hole in it, even though the hole is only for one way. You want to get the stuff out. You don't put stuff in through the hole. And you also cannot add to a pre-existing hole. But you can unplug an old hole. So long as the old hole was not plugged at a point in the barrel which is below where the dregs typically are. When you have a barrel of wine, all the sediment went to the bottom. If there's a hole towards the bottom, that hole was not meant to be unplugged. A hole at the bottom point of the sediment is meant to hold fast, to last. And you cannot open it. But any other old hole along the height of the barrel, you can unplug. You can make a hole in the cover of a barrel to get wine out. So long as you make the hole from above. But to make a hole on the side of the cover, asur is forbidden because that resembles making a utensil, which is related to the milacha of haka'ah bepatish. A person can break open a barrel to eat figs from it. I think I've showed this picture before. He discovered the 3,000-year-old barrel with a whole string of figs still attached, still intact. And this is it, right here. You break a barrel open to eat dried figs from it. So long as you don't intend to make a vessel, a utensil, when you break it open. And a person can also bring a barrel of wine to the table, and very ceremoniously, very dramatically chop off the cover with a sword. You don't have to worry about making a hole or all these other things that we just mentioned. This flourish is only meant to show your generosity. You're not trying to make a vessel, you're not trying to make a utensil, you're not trying to violate the melacha. Halacha gimel ukashem she'asur liftoach kol nekev, the same way you can't unplug any hole. Kach asur listom kol nekev, you can't plug any pre-existing hole. Lefichach, therefore, asur listom nekev echavit, you cannot stuff the hole in a barrel. Even if it's something which won't flatten out, which is the melacha, which we're going to discuss later, the melacha of flattening out leather. You can't smooth out things that you would stuff a hole with. And even if it's not a cloth, so it's not going to come to be wrung out, there shouldn't be any other problem with it. Let's say you'll stuff it with a pebble or with a wood chip. You can't do it because of the issue here of makeh bepatish. But if you don't mean to plug the hole, you have a hole and you put food in the hole to store the food. And by default, you're also plugging a hole, mutar, that's allowed. You could even purposely make a trick with this matter and put the food there with the intent to stuff the hole, even though it just looks like you're storing the food. Anything which is the final stage of work, you're biblically liable for the malacha of makeh bepatish. And because of this, hagorer kol shehu, o hametaken kli be'eze davar sheyetaken. A person who files, planes down the smallest amount of an object, or if he fixes some kind of utensil in any way, shape, or form, Chayav, you're biblically liable. Lefichach, therefore, the rabbis went ahead and made an even further decree. Asur lahashmiya kol shel shir b'Shabbat. You cannot use an instrument to play music on Shabbat. Bein biklei shir, whether we're talking about literal musical instruments, kagon kinorot u'nevalim, like harps and lyres, bein bishar dvarim, or anything else that you're using to produce a musical sound. Afilu lahakot be'etzba ala karka or ala luach. Even to bang with your finger on the ground or on a board, or achat keneged achat, or one on the other, kederech hameshorerim, like some people that play instruments like to do, or lekashkeshet ha'egoz latinok, or to rattle a walnut for a child, or lesachek bo bezug, or to play in front of the child with a bell, kadeshi ishtok, to quiet him down. In all these cases, kol zeh v'chayotze bo asur. All of this is forbidden, not because there's an inherent problem with playing music on the Shabbos, but only because gzeira Hashem yitaken klei shir. Maybe something's going to break in the instrument, and you're going to come to fix it and violate the melacha of makeh b'patish. In Shulchan Aruch it says that although you can't use an instrument, but with your voice, you're allowed to make musical sounds. You can whistle. There's no problem at all. Halacha hey ein misapkin v'lo merakdin ve'ein mitapchin b'Shabbat. We don't clap, we don't dance, we don't bang our chests on the Shabbos. Others say misapkin means to drum, and mitapchin means to clap hands. Gzeira shama yitaken klei shir. Those acts you're doing manually might lead you to fix other instruments. But to clap your hands in an abnormal fashion with the back of your hand is allowed. I should note here, it's very important because it's a Hasidic custom to show joy on the Shabbos and to dance and to clap. The Rebbe addressed this issue many times. I'm just going to post one on the screen here. This is from Shabbat Bereshit, Tafshin Lamed Aleph, the day after Simchat Torah, 1970. And the Rebbe began one of his talks, and he said, I'm just going to read the quote here, Yesh ka'elu shekashe lahem ha'inyan shel mechiyat kapayim b'Shabbat v'yom tov. There are those that take issue. It's difficult for them to watch when people clap their hands on Shabbos and holidays. V'lachein ad lifnei kama shanim hayu nohagim la'asot zot ba'ofen shel shinui. And therefore, just a couple of years ago, people would only clap on Shabbos with a shinui. In the notes, they say the Rebbe actually with his hands showed how they would go like this, back of the left hand onto the right palm. And the Rebbe says, kind of cynically or sarcastically, "Muvan is a panim yesh lesimcha kazo." Everybody can understand if that's your joy. What kind of a joy you're going to have clapping your hands backwards like this. Aval but, says the Rebbe, kvar yidu'ah hatshuva shel minchat alazar mimunkach. Everybody knows, it's well known, the famous responsa written by the Minchas Elazar, the great Munkach Rebbe, shemutar davar al pi halacha, where he explains why it's permissible, totally permissible, halachically, to clap your hands on Shabbos regularly. V'hainu, which means shenosaf lekach shekinu minhag Yisrael shetorahi. Besides the fact that it's Jewish custom, and Jewish custom is always considered to have the same level as Torah. V'ad sheminhag mevatel halacha k'di tabi Yerushalmi, even the Jerusalem Talmud says sometimes custom can override Jewish law. With the response of the Minchas Elazar, we know how it fits even according to halacha. So there's absolutely no problem with clapping on the Shabbos as is our custom today, especially if it's to show joy. And just wanted to say that, although we're learning the Rambam, and he does rule that we shouldn't, but practically the accepted custom is to absolutely clap on the Shabbos. Ein shatin al pnei hamayim. We cannot go swimming on the Shabbos. Gzeira shema yitaken chavit shel shayatin. How do you like that? You might end up fixing what's called a barrel of the swimmers, essentially a floaty of some sort, a floating device. Breicha shebechatzer, a pool in your courtyard. Mutar lashut betocha, you can swim in your private pool. She'eino ba la'asot chavit shel shayatin, because you're not going to come to make these floaties. It's just a small pool. V'hu she'yeh la safar mukefet. That's provided that there's a clear rim all around the pool. It's not like you just walk into the pool. Shelo ye'aker mimena hamayim, in a way where the water can't just flow out of it. So there's a clear difference between a pool and the sea. The sea you can't go into on the Shabbos. It's a karmelit, there's different issues. You carry water with you. We saw in earlier chapters. The pool in the back of your house, if you have a clear border around it, so it shows the difference between it and the sea. Halacha vav. We may not cut through the tube of a reed, because it's actually like fixing a utensil. And now it becomes usable to do certain things with it. If it was already cut, even if it isn't cut down to the proper size, you can actually put it into a pre-existing hole in a barrel to siphon out water from it, or to use wine, or to use as a straw. We're not going to be worried that perhaps you're going to fix it, because if the hole is already there, the reed is already cut. You cannot put a myrtle leaf or something like that into a hole. of a barrel, to allow the wine to spray through it, to flow through it. That's like constructing a faucet on Shabbos, which is forbidden. You cannot break pottery. You cannot tear paper, even if it's down to size. Because that's like fixing a vessel, a utensil, and that's the malacha of haka'a bepatish. Halacha zayin zmora, shehi kshura betafiach, a branch which is tied to a cup. We can use the cup to fill water or stuff from a well or something like that on the Shabbos. If the branch isn't tied to the cup, we cannot then tie the branch and use it as a device to fill up water with the cup. Because there's a decree that you might go to take a branch that's still attached to the ground and cut it off on the Shabbos. That's one problem. Plus, you're going to put it firmly into the cup, which is a second problem, as we saw yesterday of boneh, of the melacha of building. Asur lachof klei kesef begar tekon. You cannot polish silver vessels with gar tekon. Some say this is alum powder, which was a natural polish. Some say it's tartar, different things. Because you're polishing the silver in a way which artisans do, professional artisans. That's like fixing a vessel and concluding your work on the Shabbos. What you can do is rub down silver with salt or with niter. That's less of a professional cleaning, polishing agent, and therefore it's allowed to be used. Any other vessel of any other material can be rubbed down with anything, no problem. You cannot wash the dishes, bowls, and pans or anything like it, because that's like fixing them. Some commentators say we're talking about, the dishes the way they used to be. They weren't so flat and so smooth and easy to wash, and today it's different. They also mentioned the point of if you're going to reuse the dish on that same Shabbos, you can wash it. But this is the Rambam's bowls and the Rambam's pans you cannot wash. As I just said, unless you're washing them to eat another meal on the same Shabbos. But drinking utensils, like cups and jugs, can always be washed. There is no set time for drinking. Drinking happens all throughout the day. It isn't a problem. Whenever you need to drink, you may always need to drink at random times, so you can always wash your drinking utensils. You cannot make your beds on Shabbos only to sleep on them after Shabbat. But you could make your beds on the night of Shabbos if you plan to use them the next day. You cannot put into the mikveh vessels that are ritually impure on the Shabbos. It's like fixing the vessel. Now you're able to use it. But a person who is ritually impure, mutar lidbol, can go to the mikveh if he needs to on Shabbat, because if you look at him, you won't see necessarily that he's trying to fix himself. You see a guy taking a bath, he's going to cool off. You cannot sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer on Shabbat. In the 10th book of the Rambam, we have the concept of the para aduma. When somebody becomes ritually impure from a corpse, they have to go through a 7-day process whereby on 2 of the days, they sprinkle upon this person from a mixture of water and ashes from the para aduma. That cannot be done on the Shabbos. Hamadbil kelim b'Shabbat, somebody who is dipping articles of clothing in the mikvah on Shabbos, even though he shouldn't. Bishogeg, if he did it inadvertently, yishtamesh bahen, you can make use of them. B'mezid, if he did it purposely, lo yishtamesh bahen ad lemotzei Shabbat, you shall not use them until after Shabbat. Umutar lahatbilat hamayim atmeim b'Shabbat. If you have water which is ritually impure and you want to make it pure, there is a mechanism you can use, and you can do that even on the Shabbos. Ketzad yaseh. What do you do to purify impure water? Notnan bikli she'eno mekabel tuma. Put them into a utensil which does not contract ritual impurity. There are certain types of materials that cannot become impure. Kigon kle avanim, like, for example, stone. A stone vessel can never become impure, no matter what it touches, no matter where it is. So you put the impure water into the stone vessel, umatbila kelim b'mikveh. Then dip the stone vessel slowly into the mikveh, ad sheyalem meha mikveh alehen v'yitaharu, and then let the waters of the mikveh overflow onto the rim of the vessel till they reach the impure waters. And when impure water touches pure water, all the water becomes pure. You can try this at home. If you have a bathtub, you take a little cup of water and you force it into a bigger pool of water. Eventually, the water will just overflow on the rim and fill the vessel. So you do that over here in a proper mikveh. We can't get enough of this slide. A farmer takes produce back to his home. It's called tevel, untithed produce, till he gives truma, 2% to the Kohen, maaser, 10% to the Levi, and maaser sheni, a second tenth that he takes to Jerusalem, or in certain years, maaser ani, 10% goes to the poor. You cannot do this You cannot separate Trumot and Maasrot on Shabbat. It looks like you're fixing something which wasn't fixed. Now the produce is ready to use. Halacha Yud. We move on to the next malacha. Ha'abada, working leather. Me'abed, tanning leather, processing it. Me'avot malachot, who is part of the 39 primary categories of labor. V'hamerakech or b'shemen, one who uses oil to soften hide. Kederach sheha'abdanin osin, as the tanners, the leather workers do. Hareze me'abed v'chayav, that's biblically under the category of me'abed, and you'll be held liable. Lefichach, therefore, said the rabbis, you shouldn't do things similar to that. Lo yasuch adam raglo b'shemen, a person should not anoint, smear his foot with oil, when the foot is inside something leather, a new leather shoe, a new leather sandal, because that's like working leather with oil. But what you can do is you can anoint your foot with oil, and then put on your shoe or your sandal, even if they're new. Matter of fact, you can smear any part of your body with oil. Here, this cream, not so accurate, but should have been oil. You can smear all your body with oil and roll onto a new leather mat without having to worry. When is this allowed? When there's a little bit of oil, where it's simply going to polish the skin, the leather a little bit. But if you put so much oil on your body that if you were then to go and put it onto the mat or into the shoe, it will actually soften the leather. That's forbidden because you're literally like tanning it. But again, all these rules only apply to new leather. If it's old shoes, old mats, mutar, everything is permitted because there is no suspicion that you're going to actually soften it more than it's already softened. Halacha Yud Aleph HaMemareach Ritiyah b'Shabbat. The next malacha we move on to Mechikat Ha'or, smoothing down leather, taking off the hair from the hide. Anything that you smooth down on Shabbos resembles this. HaMemareach Ritiyah b'Shabbat. If one smooths down the elements of a compress, a bandage on Shabbos, again today's band-aids are much different, but in the olden times, bandages were actually made up of different herbs that would go onto your wound and you would smooth it out and it would sit there. If you do that on Shabbos, chayav mishum mochekat ha'or, you're liable on account of smoothing down hide. It's under that umbrella of the melacha. Lefichach, therefore, ein sotmin nekev b'shava v'chayotzeba. We cannot plug any holes with wax or something like it. Shema yemareach, because these are smoothable materials, and you might come to smooth it down to create an even surface after you plug the hole, which will then bring you to a melacha. Va'afilu b'shemen ein sotmin et hanegev. We don't even seal a hole with oil, gzeira mishum shava, which is a decree lest you come to cover it with wax, which then the wax you'll smooth down. Halacha Yud Bet, the next malacha we discussed today. Ktiva. Writing. Kotev me'avot melachot. Writing is one of the primary categories of labor forbidden on the Shabbos. Lefichach, therefore, asur likol bepuch v'chayotze bo b'Shabbat. One cannot apply eye paint with a brush or something like it on Shabbat. Mipnei shu kekotev. It's like writing. The asur lilvot ulehalvot. Watch how far this goes, said the rabbis. You cannot conduct business. You cannot borrow money, lend money, gzeira shema yichtov, for fear that you might write down whatever it is that you're conducting. V'chein asur liknot v'limkor v'liskor ulehaskir. You cannot buy, you cannot sell, you cannot rent, and you cannot rent out. Gzeira shema yichtov, for fear that you might come to write things down, to record whatever transaction took place. Lo yiskor adam po'alim b'Shabbat. A person should not hire workers on Shabbos. V'lo yomar lechavero liskor po'alim. Neither should you tell your friend to hire workers for you. Aval lish'ol lehash'il mutar. But to borrow and to lend articles, not money, that's allowed. Sho'el adam mechavero kadayayin v'kadeshemen. A person can borrow from his friend jugs of wine, jugs of oil. Bilvad shelo yomar lo halveni. So long as you don't use the word halveni. There's two words in Hebrew for borrowing: loveh and sho'el. Loveh implies money, a monetary borrowing. Don't use that word. Just sho'el, to borrow. Whether you're selling verbally something or you're selling by giving something over. You're giving him the article. Asur, it's forbidden. Asur lishkol, you also can't weigh things that you're selling. Ben b'moznayim, just you can't weigh things in general. Ben b'moznayim, ben shelo b'moznayim, whether on a scale or not. Kashem she'asur lishkol, kach asur limnot v'limdod. The same way you can't weigh, you also can't count and you can't measure. Ben b'kli midah, whether with a measuring cup. Ben bayad, whether with a hand. Ben b'chevel, whether with a measuring cord. Doesn't matter. No measuring allowed on the Shabbos. Halacha Yudalid ein danin b'Shabbat. We may not conduct a judicial case on the Shabbos. V'lo choltzin v'lo miyabmin. Neither can we oversee chalitza or yibum. This means levirate marriage. When a person passes away childless, there's a mitzvah in the Torah for the brother of the deceased to marry the dead brother's widow. That's called yibum. In the case where the brother does not want to take her in marriage, there's a mechanism called chalitza, where they go to the court and the woman takes off this brother's shoe, and basically that breaks the bond between them, and the brother doesn't have to marry. So the court cannot oversee a yibum or a chalitza on Shabbat. V'lo mekadshin, we also cannot betroth a woman, bring her into marriage. Gzeira shema yichtov, all these for fear that you might write something down to hold a record. Ve'en makdishin, we may not consecrate things to the temple. V'lo ma'arichin, nor may we declare erchin. Erchin is a special type of vow where you say, I want to give the erech, the Torah value of somebody to the temple. The Torah writes, Torah ascribes human value when you say this word erech. Till age 5, you're worth a certain amount, till age 20, till age 60, etc. So if you use this expression of ma'arichin, you cannot oversee the fulfillment of that vow on Shabbat. V'lo macharimin, neither may we consecrate things. It's a different type of consecration. One is called hekdesh, one is called cherem, to the temple or to the kohanim. For this resembles a business transaction. Ve'ein magbihin trumot u'masrot. Let's go back to that slide there. Yeah, we cannot take produce. We cannot tithe produce. Take trumot and masrot. Shezed domeh lemakdish otan perot sheifrish, because it looks like you are sanctifying, consecrating the produce which you separated. V'od, furthermore, besides what we mentioned before, earlier in the chapter, it's like fixing them on Shabbos. You have two issues. With taking Trumot and Masrot, you have an issue of Makeh Patish, and you also have an issue of Ktiva, not coming to write something down. We cannot do Ma'aser Behema, the tithing of the animals. This was a mitzvah that every person has at the end of each year, to gather together all of the livestock that were born that year, have them pass through the entrance to the pen, one at a time, and every 10th one you would mark, and it would be given as a sacrifice to the Holy Temple. The marking was typically done with paint, with red paint. So the Rambam says you cannot do Maaser Behema on Shabbat, Gzeira Shema Yirshom B'Sikra. Perhaps you're going to follow common practice and mark the 10th animal with red paint, and that's forbidden for writing on the Shabbos. Umakdish Adam Pischo b'Shabbat v'chagigato b'Yom Tov. However, there's one exception. You can consecrate your Korban Pesach, your Paschal sacrifice, on the Shabbos. You can also consecrate your Chagiga, your festival sacrifice, on the festival. Shazu mitzvat hayomi. That's the mitzvah of the day. You have to bring the Korban Pesach today anyway, so you can consecrate it as well. Ukeshem she'en makdishin, kach ein mikadshin meichatat. The same way we don't consecrate things to the temple, we cannot consecrate the sprinkling waters. Mentioned that before, the red heifer. The ashes of the red heifer were mixed with water in a very special way, and once the ash and the water mixed, that's called meichatat. Now it becomes holy as sprinkling water. You cannot do that mixing. You cannot effectuate the holiness of the water on Shabbat. What if somebody did separate trumot and masrot on Shabbat or holidays? If he did it inadvertently, he can eat from the produce that he has fixed up. B'meizid, if it was done purposely, you cannot eat the food till after Shabbos. Either way, you have accomplished. Your act was beneficial. You fixed the produce. You don't have to take again trumot and masrot. Somebody consecrates something to the temple, says the vow of the erchin, or create something into a state of cherem, which is consecrated to the temple or to the kohanim, on Shabbat, ben b'shogeg, ben b'meizid, whether inadvertently or purposely, masha asa asui, what's done is done. The ein tzarich lomar b'yom tov, needless to say, on holiday what's done is done. Same thing if you do a business transaction to your friend on Shabbos, kana, your friend has acquired it. Produce that's a doubt whether it was untithed can be tithed even initially in the twilight zone between Friday and Shabbat, but not certainly untithed produce. That cannot be tithed even in the twilight zone before Shabbat. This is a bit shorthand for cases that are going to be elaborated upon in the 7th book of the Rambam. Demai, as I said before, means any produce where there's doubt whether it was tithed. Now, every maaser, every time you take a tenth from the produce to the Levi, 1/10 of that has to go to the Kohen. That's Trumat Maaser. The difference between Maaser and Trumat Maaser is that Maaser, even though it's given to the Levi, technically any Jew can eat it. But Trumat Maaser has to be eaten only by a Kohen. Now, follow this. When you have produce, which is in doubt whether you tithed it or not, you have to take Maaser from that produce. But the Jew is going to say to himself, why should I hand off that 10% to the Levi necessarily? Maybe it's not his. Maybe indeed the produce was tithed and it's okay. So you're only tithing the produce out of doubt, but the truth is you're able to hold on to it. However, the 10% of that, which should belong to the Kohen, that you also have to designate and that you cannot use. So part of the process of separating tithes from demai, from doubtfully tithed produce, is called kara shem litrumat maaser shel demai, calling the name, designating what should be the 10% of the 10% of this maaser. Hope I'm coming across clearly. You have demai, you have doubtfully tithed produce. You have to take a tenth out of doubt, maybe it wasn't taken, and then from that tenth you have to designate 1/10 that should belong to the Kohen. So you called the name, you designated the trumat maaser of the doubtfully tithed produce, or the maaser ani shel vadai, or you have for sure untithed produce, and you're going to separate the second tenth after the tenth for the Levi. You separate a tenth that either goes to Jerusalem with you or to the poor. So let's say it's the year 3 and 6 when it goes to the poor, and you haven't separated it yet. You just designated it. You called the name. You said somewhere in this pile is a tenth that goes to the poor. Lo yitleim b'Shabbat. You cannot take them out on Shabbat. Af al pi sheyiched mekoman mekodem haShabbat. Even though you designated their place, you said where it's going to be in the pile of grain before Shabbat. And the location is known. It's placed there. It's right near the fruit. You can't take it. But if a Kohen or a poor person who could eat this Trumat Maaser or this Maaser Ani always came to you as a guest, let them come and eat, and you can pass it on to them. As long as you tell him, the Kohen, that what I'm feeding you now is Trumat Maaser, and you tell the poor person that what I'm feeding you is a tenth that belongs to the poor. One may not make raffles or play dice on the Shabbos. It's like a business transaction. But a person can conduct a raffle in his own home with members of his household. Who's going to win the bigger portion? Who will win the smaller portion? Because nobody really cares about that. A person cannot calculate things which he needs on the Shabbos. In other words, on Shabbos, you cannot make calculations which you need. Bein sha'avar, bein sha'atid liot. Whether these are calculations that already happened, calculating your profit of your last business deal, or you're making future calculations for the deal that's coming tomorrow. Gzeira shema yichtov, for fear that you might come to write it down. Lefichach, therefore, cheshbonot she'en bahen tzorech. Needless calculations, mutar lechashvan, can be calculated on the Shabbos. Ketzah, what does that mean? Kama sa'im tvua hayalanu b'shana plonit. How many sa'ah, volumes of grain, did we make this year? Kama dinarin hotzi bechatnut beno. How much money did we spend on the wedding, last year? Anything like that? Shein bichlal sicha b'telah. It's idle talk. Shein bahen tzorech klal. There is no need. It doesn't bring you any value knowing how much your field produced last year or how much money was spent on the wedding. When you calculate them on the Shabbos, it's like calculating on the weekday. It's useless. One cannot read plain, simple documents on the Shabbos. Like, for example, a newspaper is considered to be shtarei hadyotot. So it shouldn't be like the way of the weekday. Interestingly here, this is related to the milacha of erasing. If you read plain documents written on the Shabbos, just documents related to mundane stuff, you might come to correct it and erase it. If a person can count the list of his dishes on his table or the guests attending his home by mouth, but not reading from a list, so it shouldn't lead him to read mundane documents. And you also might come to erase what's written on that document. The Fishbein family, they're not coming. You erase it. Therefore, if the names were engraved onto a board or onto a wall, mutar likrotan, you can read them. Let's say you have a caption engraved into a wall, you can read it on the Shabbos. It won't come to be mixed up with a document. Yeah, I misspoke. You cannot read the caption that runs under an image or under a sculpture on the Shabbos. Even to read holy writings on Shabbos. If it's a time when everybody's in the study hall, at the shir is forbidden. So you shouldn't stop people from coming to study hall and studying. Not every person should take the right to sit at home and learn Torah and then stop himself from coming to shul, to the study hall. You have a public shir every day or on Shabbos, you come to the public shir. Let's talk about some rules about when a fire happens on the Shabbos. There's a fire in a courtyard. Eino matzil kol ma sheyesh bechatzer lechatzer acheret shebeoto hamavoy af al pi she'irvu. Even though your courtyard and the neighboring courtyard made a shituf, right, a partnership which allows you to carry in the mavoy, in the shared alleyway, you cannot just start saving stuff in the courtyard, bringing them into the alleyway. This is the melacha of kibui, of extinguishing. You might come to extinguish the fire to save the stuff. Everybody knows people are worried about their money, and you might come to do something extra to save your money. Therefore, the sages decreed that if there's a fire on the Shabbos in the public in this courtyard, you can only save the food that you require for that Shabbos. And any utensils which you have to use on Shabbos, and any clothes that you can put on. Because then, knowing that decree of the sages, the person will give up on everything else, and he won't come to extinguishing. If there isn't a eruv, so you can't even take stuff out to the alleyway if you wanted, sadly, you cannot save even your food or even your utensils. Fire is raging, you got to let it rage. Earlier, we had the same concept in an earlier chapter of the laws of Shabbat, and I mentioned then that in Shulchan Aruch, there's more room for leniency when it comes to fires on Shabbos. Especially because today fires can lead to human danger, so there's a whole other set of laws. Consult your rabbi for what happens if you actually have a fire in your house on the Shabbos. We said you can save the food for that Shabbos. What's under that umbrella? What can you save? If the fire happened on the night of Shabbos, you still have to eat all 3 meals of the Shabbos. Matzilin mizon shalosh suudot. You save the food worth for 3 meals. Whatever the humans need for the humans, whatever the animals need for the animals. Nafla b'shacharit. If the fire happens in the morning, matzilin mizon shtei suudot. You only have 2 more meals left to eat on the Shabbos day. Save food for 2 meals. B'mincha. If the fire happened on Shabbos afternoon, matzilin mizon suuda achat. You can only save food enough for 1 meal. Medvarim Amurim says the Rambam halacha chaf bet. When do we say that you're limited to how much you can save? B'matzil bekelim harbe. If you're using multiple vessels to save the food, or shehayam mimalei kli umotzio ma'areh, or you were doing refills, filling up with one vessel, taking it out, pouring it out, v'chozero mimalei oto shenit, coming back to fill it for a second time. Then the maximum cap is 3 meals, 2 or 1, depending on when the fire happened. Hu she'ein matzil. That's when you can only save what you need. But if you're only taking out 1 container, 1 time, even if it has in it the contents from multiple meals, mutar, that's allowed. What does that mean? A person can save a basket full of loaves. Even though there's enough food for tons of meals. You can save an entire cake of figs. A whole barrel of wine. Same thing if you would put out your cloak, put out your clothes. You put everything you can gather into it. You pick it up, now it's 1 big sack. You take it out in 1 shot, full. Mutar, it's all permitted. You can tell others, come and save for yourselves. Everybody can come in and take whatever food they need. Or come in with a big container and fill it up and take whatever they want. And it belongs to the person that saved it. Because since there's a fire, the guy who owns it gave up. Whoever saves the food can take it. If the saver at the end didn't want to take the stuff and he gives it back to the owner, he could even ask to be paid, to be reimbursed for his work. It's not considered to be paid for work on the Shabbos, because he didn't do any prohibition. Remember, the place here has an eruv. He only was able to take out food if there was an eruv, so he was doing permissible carrying. He can ask for reimbursement, for compensation later. If at first a person saved clean bread from white flour, he cannot go back and get coarse bread. But you can always do an upgrade for the meals. You can first save for yourself coarse bread and say, you know what, I want to go back and get white bread, so I can have a better meal on the Shabbos. And then you end up with more than 3 meals worth. And on Yom Kippur, if it was Friday, as we'll see in a second, you can save on Yom Kippur whatever you'll need for Shabbos. If Yom Kippur was on Friday. But if Yom Kippur was on Sunday and the fire happened on Shabbos, you cannot save stuff on Shabbos for Yom Kippur. Certainly not for a holiday. And neither can you save from one Shabbos to the next. Umashu matzil ilbosh. That's as far as saving for food. What about saving for clothes? Lovesh kol mashu yachol ilbosh. Here you can stuff yourself with clothes. Put on whatever amount of clothes you want, whatever you can pile up upon yourself. Ve'otef kol mashu yachol la'atof. Wrap yourself in whatever you can. Umotzi, and carry it all out. Ve'omer la'achirim bo v'hatil lechem. Tell others, come save clothes for yourself. V'chol echad ve'echad lovesh u'mitatef b'kilav. Everybody comes, puts on, wraps up all his clothing, umotzi, and carries it out. It belongs to the person that saved it, like the food. Because essentially they're acquiring stuff from an ownerless state. The person who has the fire gave up on his stuff. Whoever picks it up is picking it up from hefker. Halacha chavav mutar lahatzil kol kitvei hakodesh sheyesh bechatzer lechatzer acheret shebeoto hamavoy. Even though we said before that food and utensils cannot be moved from one courtyard to another, any holy writings, scrolls of the holy writings, can be moved from one courtyard to the other. Even if there is no eruv. So long as the mavoy has 3 walls. Remember this from chapter 17? This is called a closed mavoy. It's got an enclosure on 3 sides, and you put the vertical beam on the one end of the mavoy to convert it into a private domain. So now, even if there's no eruv between the courtyards, but since the alleyway has been established as a private domain, the rabbis were less strict, and they said, you can save holy scrolls there. The scrolls have to be authentic. They have to be written in the Ashuri special Torah script and in Hebrew language. But if they are written in another language, although it was the holy script, or holy the biblical Hebrew, but in a different script, in Matzilinotam, we do not save them on the Shabbos. It isn't like a real Torah scroll. Afilu hayasham erev, even if there was an erev. Uvechol asur lekrot ben. The truth is, you can't even read such stuff on the weekday. Elamanichan bimkom atoref v'hen mitavdin me'alehen. You should leave them in an open place and let them biodegradable decay on their own. If these Torah scrolls or holy writings were written with other types of ink, not black ink, but tints or red ink, even though it's a writing that's not going to last, since they're written in the holy script and in the holy tongue, we should save them. Gilayon shel sfarim, the margins of Torah scrolls, on top of the writing, on bottom of the writing, between the portions, between the columns, in the beginning and the end of a Torah scroll. If all you have is the margins, and you know they came from a Torah scroll, we do not save them. Tables that have blessings on them or amulets, they're very holy, so to speak. They have many letters of God's names, many topics of the Torah. We do not save them from being engulfed by the fire. Let the fire take them, and don't desecrate the Shabbos for that. Halacha chavchet, Sefer Torah. If you have a Torah scroll which was very, very worn out, most of the letters are cracked, faded. But whatever full letters were left, you can find 85 full letters. Even if one of those letters are the 2 Aramaic words in the Torah. Believe it or not, the entire Torah is written in biblical Hebrew with 2 words that are Aramaic. When Lavan and Yaakov met up after the chase, after Yaakov left secretly, they made a treaty by building a pile of rocks. And it says, Lavan called this pile Yegar Sahaduta, the pile of witness. And it's in Aramaic because he spoke Aramaic. So even if one of the 85 letters that you're finding in the Torah are these Aramaic words, they count. And now it's befitting to save it. Or if there's a full portion, somewhere there's a full portion in the Torah, has Hashem's name, even if it has less than 85 letters, Kigon Vayihi bin Soa Ha'aron, like that small portion, it's very small, but it has God's name in it. They can be saved from a fire. Once you're saving a Torah scroll, you can save the Torah cover with it. Once you're saving tefillin, you can save the cover of the tefillin with them as well. Not only that, even if there's money inside these covers, and you end up saving money, it's okay, because the main thing they're trying to save is the Torah scroll and the tefillin. Whatever comes along with that is secondary, and there's no problem to save it as well.